With our two special guests tonight, Dr. Raymond Moody, Dr. John Turner. We'll be back in just a moment. We're talking about glimpses of eternity and much more when we come back on Coast to Coast AM. John, can you tell us about the term Lazarus syndrome? What does that mean?
Well, George, I was first asked that on ISIS Paranormal Show, and I had to think carefully about that because I had never seen a case. But actually, there are three things of interest, and it ties in with Dr. Moody's work and what we're talking about. There's a Lazarus effect, a Lazarus sign, and a Lazarus syndrome. And briefly, that story of Lazarus in the Bible is that he was called by the sisters of Lazarus, Martha and Mary, to come and help because he had died. And Jesus didn't come right away. For some reason, he waited and appeared on the fourth day. And that small phrase from the Bible, Jesus wept, had to do with what happened before he resurrected Lazarus. And that's a whole other point. But the point is he was able to resurrect Lazarus. And that word Lazarus can be interpreted from the Hebrew meaning God has helped. So the Lazarus effect actually is something in physics, in semiconductor and detectors that were placed in areas of high radiation. What would happen, these high-energy particles would trap the electrons and the holes. Electron and holes is semiconductor physics, and these detectors would suddenly put out a reduced signal, and they would become a dead detector. And then what happened back in 1997, it was, in Bern, Switzerland, two investigators found out that at low temperatures, we're talking about, minus 100-something degrees Celsius, these detectors came back to life. And this phenomena they called the Lazarus effect. Well, the Lazarus sign, now to move into the medical field, is something that happens in a brain-dead patient. And as I said, I've never seen it, but in people who maybe are doing transplant surgery, once a patient is declared brain dead, and during the time before harvesting the organs, sometimes a reflex, similar to a knee jerk, will happen, and the arms will raise, bend at the elbows, into the air, and then fold across the chest, similar to the Egyptian mummies. Huh. And the reason this is important, George, is because, people, nurses and doctors who see this might say, wait a minute, did we make a mistake here? And this reflex is shown to be preceded by a shivering motion of the patient's arms and the appearance of goose flesh on the arms and trunk. And then the arms will flex at the elbows, lift into the air, and then fold above the chest. And I said it must be a rare thing. I certainly have never seen it. The final thing is the Lazarus syndrome. Now, this is a little more pertinent to what we're discussing today. It's been a handful of cases, maybe 20 or 30, of people who were pronounced dead and then later came to life. There are many such small cases, but the biggest case is one that your guest, Dr. Morse, discussed briefly a few nights ago. He calls the man Yuri, but it's George Rodania. And the reason this is important, this is a Russian fellow who was a neuropathologist, and he died, and he was pronounced dead, put it like that, and he was in the morgue. And on the fourth day on the autopsy table, as the knife plunged into his skin, he woke up, so to speak. And this changed him so much that he became a minister. He has passed on, but his near-death experience is pertinent because he describes himself as being in a total realm of darkness, complete blackness. And he came to think, well, what is happening? What had happened? And then he began to see the light, a bright light, at first like a camera flash, but constant brightness. And pretty soon he saw the visions of, what's he describe it, molecules and atoms flying about, and then he went through that life review process that Raymond has described so well. He saw his life from beginning to end, all at once, all the drama like a holographic image. And during this encounter with the light, he says what all of these people say, a sense of peace and joy. And the critical thing he realized, he said, and I want to quote him on this, George, he said, I came to see that reality is everywhere, that it is not simply the earthly life, but infinite life. Everything is not only connected together, everything is also one. And I think that Raymond's work is really going to show us that we're more than just brothers and sisters, George. We're all one.
There's no
that's
doubt
the
about
Lasser
that.
syndrome.
No doubt about that. Okay. And Raymond, since you wrote Life After Death, Life After Life years ago, and now this, Glimpses of Eternity, have you seen a change in public's perception of near-death experiences?
Absolutely. When I first started investigating this, which was, I heard George Ritchie in 65, then in 69 I heard it from one of my own students at East Carolina University, and in the 3 years I taught philosophy there, quite a number of students and also businessmen from the community that invited me to their civic clubs and so on. And at that time, what I would hear from people was, they were very reluctant to talk about this because although they knew something extraordinary had happened to them and that it had changed their lives, they were very reluctant to talk about it because they felt that probably they were the only person to whom it had ever happened. And it was a real unknown when I first started investigating it. But then after the publication of Life After Life in 75, and then, as you know, physicians all over the world confirming this in their own societies, I think what's happened now is that there is this very solid public awareness of this phenomenon. But as you know, the standard format of debate is between those who tend to say, "Oh, this is an afterlife," and then on the other hand, those who explain it away as physiological or neurophysiological. But now, as just John was saying, and I say too, that now with the emergence of identically the same phenomenon, every marker that we use to identify as a near-death experience also occurs in shared death experiences, so there's no real way of differentiating between these two. So now I think that in very short order, the world is going to become aware that somehow this thing that we already know all over the world as the near-death experience seeps out to people standing around, and this has got to make a sort of leap upward of the debate about this. I mean, what is this?
What is causing the evolution, the mood shift, for example?
Well, I think there's probably a lot of things. One is that back in the 70s, when I first started hearing them, and on into the 80s, these shared death experiences were mostly something you heard from medical personnel.
Right.
But now with the change of the hospital practice, the families are there till the end, and so just people outside of the medical community are commonly experiencing this. And then I think one thing, and this is just entirely Raymond Moody speaking here. I mean, I'm not a sociologist, but I do really feel, George, that don't you think a lot more people now are becoming aware that the world is in deep trouble?
Oh, yeah. As a matter of fact, I was at a conference in San Leandro, California, Raymond and John, this Saturday, and my very first question to this packed audience in the Battle Theater was, how many of you feel, show your hands, how many of you feel as if government is going in the right direction?
Yeah.
Not one hand went up. Not one.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you're absolutely
And then, with all of the many very complex factors coming together, I think that this is, people are reaching out for something. This naturally turns people's thought to mortality. And it's very common when people get in their 50s and 60s, they begin to think of mortality. And then you think of the vast number of baby boomers, that post-World War II generation, that are now getting into that period where mortality is just a natural development as people start thinking about this, that I think this is going to turn people's attention to this whole question of life after death now in a very, very serious way.
In Glimpses of Eternity, did people see the ectoplasm, the mist leaving the body?
Yes, this is something I've heard from a long time from doctors and nurses, as I said initially back in the 70s, but now from lots and lots of family members and so on, or friends who they're at the bedside of dying loved ones will tell us that as their loved one dies, they seem to see something stand up or sort of rise up from the dead body, and this may be described as a transparent replica almost of the person, or in many cases this mist, for want of a better term. People say, again, it's very difficult to describe this, but they say it's not just like a cloud of like a cloud you would see in the sky, because it has what seems to be an active inner structure to it, but that insofar as they can describe it, they describe a golden or golden grayish mist, which seems at the point of death to rise from the body. Not so long ago, I heard an Italian physician describe it to me as he said he saw this golden light just form up around the chest, as I believe is said, of his patient who had just died, and then to rise up, and it seemed to just disappear through the ceiling. And again, if you ask around among physicians, you're going to hear lots of cases of this. And what is that? I mean, one difficulty is that we really don't have the conceptual apparatus to talk about this. And you know what, George? One of the great tragedies, really, of the whole area of interest that you and I and John and many other people have is that, unfortunately, the opposition, who calls themselves the skeptics, are so utterly incoherent in their approaches that they don't even know what the word skeptic means. And this to me is particularly irritating because, as you may know, one of my favorite things to do is to teach ancient Greek philosophy. And when I get to the real skeptics and explain to students what that means, it came from the ancient Greek philosopher Pyrrho, Pyrrho, who was post-Aristotelian, and is a very legitimate philosophical movement, and yet these contemporary people who don't even know what the word means say, "Oh, I'm a skeptic about these near-death experiences. I think it's just the chemistry of the brain or whatever." Well, to be a genuine skeptic, they need to stick to what they know about, which is certainly not anything about skepticism. Right. But what we got to have now is a real formulation of some sort of new rational means of getting at this problem, because the old framework of debate is not going to work anymore.
But people seem willing to listen this time, though, Raymond, don't they?
They do. There's so many things coming around now that are just so complex. We're in such a complex condition of existence now that people are beginning to come out of the doldrums, I think, partly maybe because of all the baby boomers now facing their mortality or so on. But we are in for a real shakeup in the way that the question of life after death is debated, and it's going to come. And you know how conservative I am, but I'm completely confident within the next 5 years we're going to see a whole different way to look at this question and debate about
it. John, I want you to know, by the way, you're featured quite prominently in the book, Tell Me What You See. It is Ed Dames and Joel Harry Newman's book. And you're in there.
I was looking at that book, George, and, the remote viewing and all these things have to do with, how does this consciousness work? And, as Raymond said, I didn't mean to interrupt you, George, but as Raymond said, we can no longer doubt this. We've talked about the oxygen effects, and they don't really reproduce this near-death experience to deprive the brain of oxygen. We've talked about carbon dioxide, and a high carbon dioxide level does not do it. The other things that have been studied, the chemicals we talked about, they don't really, they mimic some of these things, but certainly not the key features like the life review. We didn't talk about the gravity-induced problems. The famous paper of Dr. Winery, it was in the Journal of Near-Death Studies in 1997 with the fighter pilots and the centrifuge. Well, it produced some of these effects, and the skeptics that Raymond alluded to might say, well, this is what happens. The brain is deprived of blood flow. But, there were no life reviews in those cases. 70% had convulsions, which we don't see in these near-death experiences, and no changes in personality values. And the other thing, they did see relatives, but no deceased relatives were seen in these little dreamlets. And then we have the cases of, like, Pam Reynolds and Dr. Morse's cases of a child underwater. So Raymond is right. Something is going to explode, and that explosion is going to be to realize that it's not like shutting off a light switch when we leave here. There's something else that continues, and we just may have to realize that if we're not learning our lessons, we may have to repeat them.
Well, you might have to. Raymond, you talk a little bit, too, about the music and sound in near-death experiences. What causes that?
Well, again, I don't know, but I do know this, that George Ritchie, who was the finest person I ever knew, George, he was, I met him in 1965 when I was an undergraduate at UVA. He died about 3 years ago. Still the finest human being I ever knew. George said that during his near-death experience, he heard music so beautiful, he said that there was simply no way to describe it.
The trumpets, right?
Well, I don't know of anybody who's specifically told me of trumpets, but they say that this is just absolutely heavenly music. I hear this also from people with shared death experience who say that they hear this music suddenly going on as their loved ones are dying, like a celestial music or something coming from nowhere. And George, another really interesting thing. This is again something that anybody with patience and sincere attitude of investigation can find out for themselves, although it's not recorded anywhere in the literature that I know of, except in a couple of places where I wrote about it, and also in Plato's Phaedo. But that is that not nearly as common as the near-death experience, but nonetheless common enough that any diligent, sincere investigator is going to be able to find cases. And that is that sometimes in the last few hours or days or sometimes minutes of somebody's life, that even if, according to their relatives, as far as their relatives knew, they never had any interest whatsoever in poetry or song, that they will start reciting poetry or sometimes singing, sometimes even making up poetry on the spot. And this phenomenon was recorded by Plato in his dialogue, the Phaedo. It happened to Socrates on Socrates' last day of life.
I wonder, Raymond, if that's where they also got the songs from angels and things like that, from these near-death experiences. Stay with us. We're at the half, but we'll be back with more. Next hour, we'll take your phone calls with Raymond Moody and John Turner. Hey, by the way, are you a member of Streamlink Coast Insiders? You can be for just pennies a day, getting downloads, podcasting, iPhone apps, Android and BlackBerry apps coming very soon. Had a preliminary meeting on that, and I'll have a specific date very shortly, but it's humming along at a pretty good clip. Back in a moment on Coast to Coast AM. Raymond, generally, what has happened to people who are part of this near-death experience, the sharing portion, does that change them? Is this a life-altering event for them?
It really does. It does. And it gives them a lot to think about. I've heard a lot of people over the years have told me that whereas before they were dubious about an afterlife or felt there wasn't an afterlife, or really, as most people do, apparently, just sort of go through life without really thinking much about it, that this really does convince them that there's something afterward. I hear a lot of people, when they're telling the stories or have a look on their face of just utter astonishment. They can't deny what they saw and felt, and yet it came as a real surprise to them.
Fascinating.
Yeah, so it does that. Now, one thing, I haven't seen the same kind of thing that you do with people, for example, who come back from a near-death experience and see this panorama unfold and come back and tell us that the most important thing we can do with our lives is to learn how to love. And instead, it wakes them up to the reality of an afterlife, but they don't come back with this same message of love. And I suspect that probably has to do with the fact that the great majority of them don't go through this panoramic life review. In other words, that seems to be the factor in the near-death experience that wakes people up to this universal love. Now, at the same time, I will say that I've heard plenty of cases where people empathically co-live this dying review or life review with their dying loved one, and that does bring about this sense of love. One of the most fascinating cases I had, George, was this wonderful lady I first knew in Carrollton, Georgia, where I used to teach psychology 20-plus years ago. And she had one of these marriages with her husband where they had literally grown up together in the same little town as neighbors. And then as they grew older, just sort of naturally developed into a marriage relationship. And after they decided to get married in high school, shortly thereafter, she got pregnant. And believe me, in small-town Georgia back in her era,
that's a no-no.
Just an utterly, a real scandal. And so they were in the process of trying to figure out how they were going to tell their parents about this. No thought at that time of, having an abortion or anything like that. It was a different era. And so, but in the midst of all this, they were trying to decide how to bring this up to their parents. She lost the baby in a spontaneous miscarriage. And then throughout the rest of their marriage together, they didn't have any children. She was unable to get pregnant anymore. Well, her husband developed a really fast-acting lung cancer after several decades of marriage, and she was there with him at his deathbed, and as he passed away, she said this panorama consisting of their entire life. It was focused on his life, but she saw in it the scenes in which she was participating as well. And she said out of the segment or aspect of this life review that had to do with their loss of their baby, she said all through their marriage they had always talked about this child as though it had been a boy. Although, there was no identification made. It was just, but they assumed it was a boy. But she said in this review, in which she was actually communicating with her husband, he was obviously seeing and talking about the same scenes that she was witnessing. She said out of that aspect of it emerged this little form or a form of, and this form came up and identified herself to them as not their son, but their daughter. And so, as you can imagine, this was a very touching and overwhelming experience for this woman. And she said that they reviewed his life and the presence of this being of complete love and compassion. And this obviously changed her outlook in this very dramatic way. She came out of this telling me that she learned from this review, not of her life, but her husband's life, that really what counts more than anything else is the quality of love that you have in your life. And this is identically what we hear from people with near-death experiences.
Do you have to have any religious background, or do you have to be spiritual, Raymond?
Absolutely not. I've had this both in the case of these shared death experiences and also of the near-death experiences. I've had plenty of people who have these kinds of experiences who say that prior to this they had no religious interest or background whatsoever, and yet they have very dramatic experiences. It really doesn't have anything to do, I think, with religion.
Jeez. All right, John, let's bring you back in here and get your reaction to all of this overall from your perspective as a neurosurgeon. And I do want to ask you a personal question because I have a friend. I might as well do that, get it out of the way.
Okay.
He fell a year ago. He's got cord syndrome, and he hasn't severed anything, but he's still paralyzed from the neck down. What's wrong with him?
Well, I can tell you this much, George. When I was in medical school, I worked on a research project in the animal lab. And what I would do is expose the spinal cord of dogs in the thoracic area. And then we would drop a small weight through a tube onto the spinal cord. It would just hit the spinal cord and bounce, but the dog would be completely paralyzed. And then we would examine the spinal cord later looking for some way to prevent this damage. So it doesn't have to take a break in the spinal cord to paralyze someone. Now, the good news perhaps for your friend is that he may recover in the neck. The spinal cord in that area has a good blood supply. In the thoracic area, it's completely different. But I would say if your friend was recently paralyzed, there's a good chance that a lot of recovery is going to come his way.
It's been about a year, though.
Well, and he has no signs of any recovery?
Well, he's moving his arms and legs, but, I mean, he's not doing it to the point where he can get up and, and take care of himself or feed himself. He's kind of like shuffling. I bought him an iPad so he can email now by, like kind of moving his fingers over the screen.
I understand.
But, it's been a year. It's frustrating.
There are a lot of things that are on the horizon, like stem cell injections, so forth, and there are a lot of complementary medical treatments that can occur. I received a email early today from an engineer in Ohio who said that if you can, please get some information to Mr. Norrie that there are some treatments for disease that perhaps he should be aware of. So at a later date, I'll share that with you, George. It may be pertinent.
All right. And that, of course, leads us into some of the work that you've been doing with Dr. Moody about all of this. These are shared experiences. Are you amazed at how often these experiences are shared, John?
Well, yes, let me tell you, George, I didn't really know much about the shared experience of the last few years. And a couple of years ago when my mother passed, I was sitting at her bedside. For the last 3 weeks, George, she went into a complete sleeping thing. She didn't wake up. She couldn't take any fluid. She was in the last stages of Alzheimer's disease at age 99 almost. And as I sat with her the night she did make her transition, she suddenly woke up and turned and looked right in my eyes. And as Raymond knows, I took that chance to look right in her eyes and say, Mom, I want to tell you again that thanks to you and everything you've done, we're all going to be just fine, and you can go now. Well, she closed her eyes and went back to sleep. And had I known about the shared death experiences, I would not have left the room. What I did, I set the clock for 2 hours because I would turn her every 2 hours. She was completely bedridden. I ran to the next room, And I tried to sleep, and as I went to sleep, I had a dream, George, and in the dream, I was making rounds in a hospital. I was wearing a white coat, making rounds, and the nurse said, "Dr. Turner, please look at your mother." And I walked over to the bed where she was, and I pulled out my pen, and I wrote on the bedspread, "No oral intake for 3 weeks. Family does not wish to push fluids," just like an order to the nurses. And as soon as I signed my name, I woke up. I went into the next room, and sure enough, she wasn't breathing. Had I stayed, I might have experienced this. And I think this is an appropriate segue to Dr. Moody, if he doesn't mind, telling of his shared experience.
Well, yes, George. I have been into this for many, many years. The first one I heard was from one of my own medical school professors in 1972, right at the end of my first quarter of medical school, who had resuscitated her own mother and had an empathic or shared death experience when her mother passed away. And so I'd been working on this for a long time, and in 1994, I was getting ready to do a systematic study of these shared death experiences. And to make a long story short, I was out west with a bunch of other doctors and so on, and we were talking this over. We had a meeting, and on Sunday, when we finished our meeting, it happened to be Mother's Day. And it was in May of '94. So I went to the local shopping mall and used an antique object that we used to call a payphone, which hardly exists anymore. But I went to a payphone at the shopping mall, and I called Mom to wish her a happy Mother's Day. And of course, as you would, I just said, "Well, how are you doing?" And I remember, George, how absolutely chipper her voice was, just very cheerful. Yeah. She said, "Oh, I'm doing great." And then she went on to say, and she said, and yesterday I developed this rash. And she said that my brothers and sisters had gotten concerned, so they took her down to the emergency room, and a doctor looked her over and really just kind of dismissed it. He said he didn't think this was anything significant, just some sort of idiosyncratic response. But as a precaution, he gave her an appointment to see another doctor on Monday, which would have been the day after I talked with her. So anyway, on Sunday when I talked with her, everything was doing fine. The next day she went to the doctor, and the doctor examined her, and he said, "You have non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. You have 2 days to 2 weeks to live." And so my wife and I went to there, and we were with her in the hospital the entire 2 weeks. She did indeed die 2 weeks after the diagnosis. And so, George, I mean, again, words fail me here, but basically what happened was that my mother was comatose for 2 days, but just in the process of dying, as she was dying, she sort of came to, she said twice very audibly, "I love you." And as she was dying, for want of a better term, George, people who've been through this know there are really no words, but the best way I can describe it to you is to say that rather, instead of like in a three-dimensional space, we were in this curved space. It was like I felt that the room was kind of hourglass-shaped and was filled with this light. And I have never had such an experience before or after in my life. Everything was completely calm. A complete peace came over the situation. My wife, who was there with me, had the same experience. My sister felt the presence or experienced the presence of my father, who had passed away about 18 months before. My brother-in-law had the same kind of very, very thrilling and uplifting experience. one thing is, again, I can pretty much say that, I'm driven by curiosity, as you are, and what happened at that point was that my curiosity, by and large, was satisfied. In other words, I'd been working on these empathic death experiences for a long time, but being driven by curiosity. But when it happened to me, it put a whole new light on it, and it took me, that really pretty much stopped my plans to do a book on it right then, because I felt, well, it's happened to me, and it put my curiosity on a different track. But in the intervening 16 years, what I've done is that I've continued to accumulate more cases, and it's reached the point now where anybody really who looks into this in a sincere way is going to be able to find plenty of cases. So I figured it was time to bring out Glimpses of Eternity now, and I'm sure that what will happen when this comes out is that again, anybody who wants to find cases of this for themselves are going to be able to do so quite readily.
John, what about out-of-body experiences? How prevalent are they?
Ago, I was describing the experience I had, and I had listened to you speak with Mary Ellen Guiley about the fact that life as we know it could be just a dream. And I completely agree with that. I think that we'll wake up one day in that new dream and things will continue on. But you asked Mary Ellen this question. You said, can one go from a lucid or a dreaming state into the out-of-the-body state? And she said, absolutely. Mm-hmm. And, I'm recounted to you my experience of having that, which involved this complete blackness, without any feeling of dread, but a complete blackness at the start. And you've interviewed our friend Robert Bruce before, and of course, this out-of-the-body experiences are quite common. And I think that it's interesting in Dr. Moody's work, dating back to his first book, he explains that some people do experience a buzzing or a clicking or some type of a sound thing, and then they enter a tunnel before they are actually out of their body. And this has been described, through the ages in all types of literature about out of the body, sensing that clicking, that buzzing, or something that precedes the out of the body experience. So I think now that people are more willing to talk about these things, we're going to hear more and more about this, George.
Absolutely. We've got various websites for you. Take heed, Dr. John Turner's, johnlturner.com, Raymond Moody's, lifeafterlife.com as well. They're already linked up for you at coasttocoastam.com. What we'll do when we come back at the top of the hour, we will take your phone calls with both of them. I know many of you have stories that you want to share, perhaps about those shared deathbed experiences as well. If you need to ever email me, that's George at coasttocoastam.com. I'm expecting a lot of emails from the folks who went out to San Leandro, California for the UFO X Fest. So that's what you use, George at coasttocoastam.com. Back in a moment on Coast to Coast AM.